Hey folks, coming at you today with a video that I'm hesitant to do. I don't like doing these kind of videos, but every so often they're important to do just to remind people of the lies and deception in the field of nutrition and fitness. Specifically this time, nutritional lies and deception, and I'm going to use the Chris Kresser example. Like I said, I hate doing videos and articles like this. I don't like using names and getting into social media, tribal warfare nonsense. And I've come to learn that arguments back and forth in our day and age, especially on social media, seldom move the needle at all in terms of changing people's minds. People just want their own existing opinions reinforced. But every so often, videos like these are necessary in order to make relevant points, especially when it comes to lies and deception being represented as truth. It's one thing to post critique of academic peer-reviewed research. It's another thing to misrepresent it completely and be deceptive about that misrepresentation. I'm going to get to that. First, I need to do this video as a shout out to Ryan over at Happy Healthy Vegan. Hopefully we'll put a picture of Ryan up here so you know who he is. So go over, if you're on YouTube, sign up for YouTube, go over to Happy Healthy Vegan and check out Ryan's posts, but specifically his three-part post about this particular video that I'm going to talk about, this particular topic that I'm going to talk about. Ryan was a lot more democratic about his presentation than I'm going to be, but I've been in the industry a long time, and the lies and deception, they never get better. They just seem to get worse and more doubled down. So I'm going to give you an example, and I'm just going to, again, remind you, shout out to Ryan at Happy Healthy Vegan for putting the work into what I'm about to explain to you. So nutrition, lies, and deception, and the Chris Kresser example. And a couple quotes that I want you to keep in mind as we go along. One of the quotes, my famous quotes that I like to use: a lie can go around the world and back before the truth can even get its shoes on. And the other quote is, figures lie and liars figure. So a few weeks back, there was going to be this big podcast on Joe Rogan with Chris Kresser, this not against meat kind of guy, versus Dr. Joel Kahn, a whole food plant-based doctor. And I was going to ignore it, but a lot of clients and other people were writing me, are you gonna watch? Are you gonna listen? Are you gonna write an article about it? And I really didn't have much interest in it, but it was going to be this big podcast debate. But what we saw in the podcast was exactly what unfolded, was exactly what I expected, where one side regularly employed lies and deception and misrepresentation of the research. So the debate wasn't that great after all, and it was everything I expected. So before this podcast of Chris Kresser versus Joel Kahn, the whole food plant-based doctor, I went and checked out Chris Kresser's website, etc., and as soon as I saw the supplement store and his supplements and his supplement bundles for this and that ailment for sale, I just rolled my eyes in disbelief, and my bullcrap radar went right through the roof. If you've read T. Colin Campbell's book Whole, then you know about isolated ingredients in a bottle and basically how inert and ineffective they are. That's an argument for another time. So this was going to be this big podcast, and thousands of people were going to tune in, and it was the plant-based doctor versus Chris Kresser. But I was not surprised when on the podcast, Chris Kresser used tried and true tactics of deception and misrepresentation of research, and taking research quotes completely out of context and making spurious conclusions of the research. And like good devious people do, you mix a little of that in with good peer-reviewed research to try to show above board stuff even when you're not being above board. And directly to Mr. Chris Kresser, if your nutritional position is solid, then you wouldn't have to use deception and or misrepresentation of research to make the spurious claims and draw the faulty conclusions that were drawn in that podcast. You also wouldn't have to use obscure research and take obscure research quotes from the research that you know your debate opponent wouldn't have access to. Anyone can do that. I can refer to a paragraph out of any one of my books if I'm going to be challenged by somebody, and if they had not had access to my books, they wouldn't have any any foundation to disagree or have a critique ready. So this is all common stuff. I knew the podcast would be a waste of time. But also, here's the thing about the consumers, folks, before I get on to the videos that Ryan from Happy Healthy Vegan went out and took the time to do to critique Chris Kresser and illustrate the level of deception and lies that's out there. When people listen to podcasts, they're often doing it in their cars, driving from here to there, or they're doing it while they're doing other things. So they're absorbing what's being told, and oftentimes they're just left with, oh, I didn't know this, or I didn't know that. Oh, that's good to know. That's, oh, that's interesting. And so they get to where they're going, and it leaves their mind except for the imprints that were left. Nobody bothers going, especially consumers, unless you're in this industry. You're not going to go and fact check the things you heard. You're going to take it for granted that people are telling you the truth and not manipulating you with lies and deception mixed in and sprinkled with the truth in order to manipulate you into a certain opinion. That's what's problem with the podcast. And this is what pundits for profit like to do. They mix lies with truth and mix deception with non-deception and misrepresentation in order to sell themselves and or sell their products. And that's exactly what went on in this particular podcast that went on for hours. And the research that Chris Kresser himself presents in this podcast debate often said the exact opposite of what he claimed it said. So imagine that. And yet all the people absorbing this who aren't going to bother to fact check believe that what he's telling you is truth because he's saying it to you. And for people who want to believe, who want to be told what they want to believe and have reinforced what they want to believe, they're never going to fact check this stuff. But as you will see in Ryan's videos, some of the stuff Chris Kresser presents in this podcast debate often says the exact opposite of what he is claiming the research is saying, and or he takes it completely out of context and twists it around to say something he wants it to say when the research doesn't say that at all. I've been witnessing this, folks, for 4 decades. It gets tiresome for me to do these videos. I don't want to do them, but every so often you have to come forward. If I wanted to do this every time someone made me aware of the lies and deception in nutrition and fitness that pass for knowledge, that's all I would be doing, and I don't want to do that. I'd rather show my own research and my own reasons for some programs and diet strategies that I have. So anyway, if you go to Happy Healthy Vegan, Ryan breaks down his critique in 3 parts. Maybe there's more coming, I don't know, but I wanted to get this out here before this podcast got old. So in part 1, we're going to just show up the YouTube clip for you here if you want to pause my video and go over and listen to Ryan debunk what Chris Kresser had to say about cholesterol. So you'll see a whole deception going on there about Chris Kresser's presentation of cholesterol research, etc. So we got that YouTube clip up there for you. If you want to pause my video right now and copy and paste that, I'll also put it in the show notes. I'll put it below there so you have access to part 1, part 2, and part 3. You can just copy and paste into your browser. And then Ryan in part 2, we'll put that video link up for you now as well, about saturated fat claims that Chris Kresser was making at certain parts of the podcast. So you'll see the deception in those saturated fat claims that Ryan went out of his way to check the research, check the facts, and expose what was actually being misrepresented or outright deception. And then my favorite of the 3-part video is part 3, where you can see Ryan. We'll put that link up there for you, part 3. You'll see Ryan putting up there in this part of the debate, including Chris Kresser's trying to say how some meat in the diet can reverse heart disease, which is a complete deception. And especially in this part, let's leave part 3 link up there, you'll see Ryan shows how research Chris presents doesn't say at all what he's claiming the research says. So in this essence, and you really want to go and listen to Ryan on this one right now, pause what I'm saying, but come back to me. I got some relevant points to make, and go listen to part 3, because you'll see Ryan shows how the research Chris presents doesn't say at all what Chris Kresser is saying the research says, and that in and of itself becomes complete deliberate deception. So you have to wonder, when lies and deception are this obvious, what someone's end goal is. Obvious to me when you're selling, when you have that many supplements for sale. I've never trust anybody when I go to their website and they have treasure trove of supplements for sale. Then of course they have an agenda that's beyond just presenting the facts. So that's part 3 of Ryan's interesting debunking of the arguments that Chris Kresser tried to throw out there as being factual and being well researched, when in fact they were completely deceptive and misrepresenting research. And as Ryan says, you can see that Chris Kresser's twisting studies, points and conclusions to make them look to say what he wants them to say, but not what the actual research and researchers are actually saying, and that is deception. So, you know, it pains me to have to do these videos, and I could, you know, just in the last week, I could do 10 more on other things that I'm seeing out there. But that's the level going on. So let's just review now. Go over to Ryan at Happy Healthy Vegan, part 1. We'll put the link up there about the deception involved in Chris Kresser's arguments in terms of cholesterol. And then we'll put the link for part 2 up there, or you can see it in the show notes, where Ryan is showing the deception, the saturated fat claims that Chris Kresser makes in this podcast debate with Dr. Joel Kahn. And then finally part 3, which is my favorite of the 3 parts. You'll see the link here, or you can go to the show notes and you can see Ryan debunk what Chris Kresser was saying here as well. But in part 3, which I really want you to listen to, I also wrote down what I want to cover: dumb statements that sound smart. People can make idiotic statements and because it comes out of a person who's eloquent, it sounds intelligent, when in fact it's actually quite idiotic and stupid. So Chris Kresser, in part 3, you'll see of Ryan's debunking of his stuff and his deception of the research. He makes dumb statement that sounds smart. I'm sure his own audience likely topped it with maple syrup and ate it with a spoon, but it's a really dumb, stupid statement. So in part 3 of Ryan's video, what Ryan shows within the debate is Chris Kresser says that his Nutrivore diet and the paleo diet haven't been around long enough to be studied. And when Dr. Kahn challenges Chris Kresser to do a study, then do a study. He says, well, I don't have millions of dollars to do a study. So then, following that, Chris Kresser makes up this completely stupid statement about his diet, and he says, trying to sound intelligent, and maybe it does sound intelligent to some of you people, but I'll show you why it isn't. Lack of evidence is not evidence against. That is a ridiculously dumb, stupid statement, asinine actually, if you understand the scientific method. Now, thank goodness, when I was in grad school, one of the courses we had to take was methodology and statistics, which was all about honoring the scientific method. So a comment like lack of evidence is not evidence against is really, really ridiculous, and you can hear what Ryan has to say about that, about dancing leprechauns, etc. But I'm going to use that statement myself. Let's say I'm also a person with an agenda to get out there and sell diets and supplements to people. So I'm going to use that statement as well. Lack of evidence is not evidence against. So based on that statement, I present to you the new Scott Abel rice cake diet. So the new Scott Abel rice cake diet is 4 rice cakes a day, 4 large rice cakes a day, any flavor. You have 1 large rice cake for breakfast, 1 for lunch, 1 for dinner, and 1 before bed. Combined, of course, with my special supplement regimen that is, my own unique supplement concoction that I put together myself. Of course, that goes along with my 4 rice cake per day diet to make up for any nutritional insufficiencies, so I can make claims and I can sell you lots of supplements. So that's my 4 rice cake per day diet. And now, if people found out about this, good nutritionists and academics who do their research, they would rightfully come out and challenge my rice cake diet. Well, I can use Chris Kresser's argument and say, well, it's a new diet. It hasn't been around long enough to be studied. But lack of evidence isn't evidence against it. So therefore, my rice cake diet is viable simply because I say it is, and simply because it hasn't been around long enough to be studied. So you see, that's called circular logic, tautological logic. And no, believe me, no reputable funding organization would even fund research on a 4 rice cake per day diet. So my logic is completely circular. And if I can get even one person to follow me and follow that diet for a short time, as we see with fasting and all these other things, then of course they're going to lose weight while starving. And I could claim proof, therefore, that my diet and supplement regimen works. So based on the fact that lack of evidence is not evidence against, then I can say all kinds of crazy crap and use that logic, as circular as it is, to make a point and to sell whatever I need or want to sell. So there's my 4 rice cake diet, based upon Chris Kresser's argument that lack of evidence is not evidence against, even though that would be an absolutely silly and ludicrous, ridiculous diet out there. And there's lots of them out there right now, I'll tell you that. So the basic point is, Mr. Kresser, if your nutritional point of view held water, then you wouldn't need to misrepresent the research and use deliberate deception to make faulty claims and take research completely out of context, and say things that the researchers weren't actually saying at all, which Ryan put in the work. Again, shout out to Ryan at Happy Healthy Vegan for putting in the work to show the outright deception going on here within this podcast. And don't even get me started on Mr. Kresser's supplement bundles that you can, if you just type in Chris Kresser supplements. Most of that is based on what is I was in the supplement industry early in my career for over 2 decades. I know how it works. Most of that's based in marketing scams called riding the research, which is completely gimmick oriented. What you do is you find micronutrients that perform specific tasks in the body, and then therefore you show what a deficiency of those would do. Therefore, if we put them in the bottle, then we make up for any deficiencies, or we make sure our stores are right. The only problem is retention and absorption and use of nutrients don't work that way. So you can bundle all kinds of crap together and call it adrenal support or whatever you want. But if you read Dr. T. Colin Campbell's book Whole, which is actually peer-reviewed, research-based, then you would see how ridiculous those kind of arguments are. So when I see a basic library full of supplements to sell, then I realize the person selling them is always going to be more agenda-oriented than they are going to be truth-oriented. So thank goodness there's people around like Ryan from Happy Healthy Vegan who just wants to put out there the research as it exists, good research, peer-reviewed research, and cut through the crap on people who will deliberately use lies and deception and misrepresentation of research, mix it in a little bit with truth in order to come across as not only an expert but as authentic. And remember what I said in the beginning, a lie can go around the world and back before the truth can even get its shoes on. And oftentimes academics get caught in this academic integrity and truth, whereas by the time they fact check and research something, the consumer's already onto something else, having totally bought into nonsense. That's how Atkins worked. That's how the diet industry has worked for decades. The same goes on here. T. Colin Campbell can say the same thing. And then when you're using academic honesty, when you're suggesting that there's always going to be exceptions to the rule, then marketers pounce on that and use it to say, well, here's my exception. And as you can see with my rice cake diet, saying that lack of evidence isn't evidence against, these are some of the ridiculous statements that no one calls out as crap. No one calls bullshit on them. And you need to call bullshit on them because that's what they are. So it's like most of these new experts don't even know and don't even care what the scientific method actually even is. And I wanted to get that on my interview with Dr. T. Colin Campbell, that I don't think most people even understand the rigors of peer review when you're publishing a paper. And Dr. T. Colin Campbell's published more than 329 of them that have appeared in basic journals, not to mention the funding he's got to carry out his studies, which is a lot different than posting an article on a website like Chris Kresser does. Where's his peer-reviewed research about things that he wants to say and the way he says them? So again, I want to do a major shout out and thank you to Ryan of Happy Healthy Vegan. Maybe I can have him on my podcast sometime in the future. I want to thank him for taking the time to look up the research Chris Kresser uses in this podcast debate with Dr. Joel Kahn and show how Kresser either misrepresents the research or is downright deceptive about it. We need more of these kind of exposés out there, but if you do that in the wild, wild west of social media internet, all you'll be doing is fighting off other people and their tribes, and it really becomes monotonous to do that. But I thought, since that Joe Rogan podcast was getting so much play and so much attention, that I think someone who went out of the way to show and debunk where one person's presenting an academic-based, fact-based, research-based position, and the other person is using deceptive tactics and misrepresentation whenever it suits them, then that stuff needs to be called out. Unfortunately, it's called out less and less often all the time, and I'm certainly not going to devote all my time to calling out every nuance of nonsense that's out there in the fitness and diet industry, because that's existed ever since I've been in the fitness and diet industry, which is unfortunate. So shout out to Ryan at Happy Healthy Vegan. Let's put up the 3-part links again, part 1 and part 2 and part 3, and go over and listen to Ryan there dismantle some of the arguments that Chris Kresser was making. And again, it's caveat emptor out there, folks. It's buyer beware. So there are going to be people who want to come on these social media sites to further their agenda, but their agenda is truth. Their agenda is furthering expertise. Their agenda is adding to the knowledge base. And then there's going to be people whose agenda is flat out to make money and earn a reputation of selling whatever it is they have to sell. And that snake oil position has been around since the dawn of time. So nutrition, lies, and deception in the fitness and diet industry, alive and well, always will be. And again, some people will get it, some people won't. Some people aren't going to like a thing I had to say because people love to hear good news about bad habits. And of course, they're going to want to say anyone that disagrees with someone who's revolutionary is a part of some corporate conspiracy or whatever. And there's a reason I've never sold supplements. If you listen to my interview with Dr. T. Colin Campbell, we both made a point, who also doesn't take supplements. We both made a point of saying we aren't anti-supplement. It's just that supplements don't do anything. So right away, when I go to somebody's website and I see them selling mountains of supplements, my bullcrap spider senses tingle, and right away I know to be skeptical. And again, I couldn't be bothered to dig into the stuff that was presented, the research that was presented within that podcast, but Ryan did do so. So I think you owe it to yourselves. If you really want the truth, if you just want your position reinforced, then don't bother and call me names and I'll just delete them in my YouTube comments, because I've been doing that for weeks. But if you really want to get at the heart of the matter, who's forming an argument that doesn't need to manipulate you and just presents the research as it is, and who's using deception and misrepresentation and taking quotes out of context, etc., to try to argue an alternative point of view for whatever reason. I wouldn't even begin to guess at the reason. So once again, nutrition, lies, and deception, the Chris Kresser example in the podcast debate with Dr. Joel Kahn, but more importantly, the shout out to Ryan at Happy Healthy Vegan for taking the time to dig into the research and see what it actually said versus the way it was presented in the podcast, and see the many contradictions, deceptions, and misrepresentations. So we'll have those 3 links to Ryan's part 1, part 2, part 3. Maybe he's doing more, I don't know, but I wanted to get this out before this podcast got old. And hopefully you understand what I'm saying. People don't fact check. Consumers don't fact check. They listen to a podcast while they're driving here or there. They don't think, I'm going to go and check that out later, and I'm going to go and check out the research. Only industry pundits will take things that far, and usually what it does is it exposes exactly what Ryan exposed in his 3-part video. And I wasn't just going to repeat that video. Ryan deserves all the credit. So hopefully you see those links up on your screen there. And you can just go listen to Ryan's 3-part video and then come back and listen to mine. Or take my word for things and start my rice cake diet tomorrow. I'll see you in the next video.